Two very similar vessels can be seen in completely different ways. Put one on a kitchen table and we simply use it as a bowl. Put another on a white plate and then suddenly people look at it as a work of art. They may look almost the same, but depending on where they sit, the way we see them can change, and sometimes even the price. One of the Japanese ceramic artists I met told me that for a while, the pressure to be recognized in the international art world nearly broke him.
例えばその作家としてアーティストとしてこう名を上げようみたいなっていう欲っていうのが、まあ、それによって自分は体が壊れてしまったから。
So today, through the stories of two Japanese ceramic artists, I want to think with you about the value of a craft beyond the price, and then how we might carry it forward. Hi, I'm Satomi Takayama. I'm a Japanese artist based between Japan and London. I've loved Japanese craft for as long as I can remember, and then over the years, traveled around Japan visiting ceramic artists, goldsmiths, and many other makers. I also make paintings and I studied art business in London, so the relationship between art and craft is something that's been on my mind for a long time. This time, I went to Tajimi, a town in Japan known for ceramics. I was lucky enough to meet two young contemporary ceramic artists who exhibit internationally and have very different approaches to their work. The first person I visited was the ceramic artist Ujiie. He shows his work internationally in the UK, Switzerland, the US, and elsewhere. His studio was filled with pieces that feel less like vessels and more like sculptures, with these energetic combinations of color. This rough, rugged texture is amazing, isn't it? It comes from the glaze forming inside the kiln, and on some pieces, he adds colors on top using urushi, Japanese lacquer. He calls this quality biological cow's baby.
結構もうやっぱその日本のそういう伝統的なその、まあ、茶道なんですけど、とかはやっぱりその結構学生の頃からその見るのが好きで、やっぱりそういうなんですかその日本文化としてのそういうリスペクトもあるから、やっぱりそういうのもなんかその取り入れて、でかつやっぱりその海外の方でもやっぱりちゃんとこうアートとしてこう強度のある作品っていうのを意識しながらやる。
Hearing this, he sounds like someone who has moved forward without any hesitation. But before reaching this point, there was a period when things became extremely difficult for him, both mentally and physically. A few years ago, around the time of a solo exhibition abroad, he became seriously unwell. His relationship with the gallery, the pressure of his career, lots of things piling up at once. After working for about an hour, he could no longer stay on his feet. That's how serious it got.
このままなんか結構具合悪くなって、あこれ死んじゃうなメンタル的に、で体もどんどん具合悪くなっていくし、
He told me about that time very quietly. One of the ideas that helped him recover was the Buddhist concept of ku, often translated as emptiness.
全部そういう自分のこだわりとか、そういう個性とかっていうのを全部こう、なくして欲をなくしてみたいな、なんかこの、まあ、世の中がこう移ろい変わってくるみたいな移ろいでいくみたいなのをなんかこう受け入れる、で自分のそのこだわりとかを全部持つなみたいな感じの考えっていうのがなんかすごい僕にとってすごい優しいなみたいな。
その時の And from there, his thinking slowly began to change.
自分の作りたいものをなんかもう他人の評価関係なしに作ろうと思ったんですよ。
I think that period of illness was a big turning point for him. Once he stopped using other people's judgment as his only measure, the act of making became enjoyable again. So, when craft, here I mean especially Japanese craft, tries to move into the world of art, what kind of barriers does it actually run into? I'd like to think about that for a moment. The international art world, as we know it today, including its museums, galleries, and art fairs, developed largely with the context of Western modernity. This doesn't mean art belongs only to the West. It just means the current rules for what we call art and how we explain its value were largely shaped there. Especially from the 20th century onwards, a work came to be judged not only by the skill involved in making it, but also by the question it raises: why the artist chose a particular material or form and the context surrounding it. Takashi Murakami has repeatedly argued that, for Japanese art to be recognized within a Western-centered art market, artists first need to understand how that system works. So when Japanese craft tries to enter that world, saying it is beautiful or the technique is incredible is not always enough to gain recognition. Not in every case, but you can get asked, what is this work asking, and what context does it connect to? But for example, for a maker who has spent decades working with clay or lacquer, translating all of that into the language of contemporary art is not easy to do alone. The ability to make something good and the ability to talk about it in the language of art are two different things. That is why, alongside the artists themselves, galleries and then others who help interpret and communicate the work can be so important. They understand how the contemporary art world works and can articulate what is already present in the work. The next person I visited was a ceramic artist Karugane-san. She's another young ceramic artist whose work is attracting attention in Japan and elsewhere in Asia. Her work and the way she makes it is really different from Ujiie-san's. Soft forms and pale colors that have a quite comforting quality. Somehow, her own gentle presence seems to come through in the work itself. Listening to her, I began to feel that these colors may be connected to the landscape and atmosphere she sees around her every day in Japan. Something I didn't know either. One of her inspirations is a kind of Okinawa pottery called penari ware.
大学生ぐらいの時にちょうどこのパナリ焼きの展示会があって、なんかその佇まいとかなんか雰囲気
が好きだったんですか。
なん
確かに、
か素朴だけど、なんかいいなと。あとなんか貝殻とかをこう砕いて、なんか混ぜて。
She was also interested in the natural changes and distortions that happen as the clay dries.
なんか壺とかもこうサイズがこれとかもこう大きくなればなるほどけど、形がやっぱり変わるのですごく、なんかそれもかっこいいのはかっこよく変形するのもあるし、なんかそしたらそれをその作品にしたいなと思うし。
Listening to her, the line between craft and art gets harder and harder to see. A lot of what she's made can be used as vessels, but what she's aiming for isn't simply to make easy-to-use tableware.
クラフトはクラフトで、まあ、こうなかなかこう、ね、難しいところもあるから、こうまあ、価格帯もやっぱり本当に違うじゃないですか、ね。でなんかどうやってこう価値を上げるというかこうって考えたら。なんかやっぱりアートの方に乗せていくことって思ってなんかまあそういうことを考えてて、でまあ、そういうタイミングでそのまあ壁掛けのちょうどなんかもともと建築家の方と一緒にやることになってこの壁掛けはやってるんですけど、でなんか器も作ってるんですけどなんかなんだろうすごく毎日使う心地の良い器を作るみたいなことがコンセプトではなくて、なんかやっぱり一つ一つ、まあ、ちゃんと造形的に綺麗なものだったりとか、作品として作りたいなっていうのはあって、で、まあ、かつまあ使えてはいるんですけど、中で壺とかもやっぱりもうちょっとこう頑張りたいなっていうか、その価格帯も上げていきたいし、ってなったらそうなんかこう、まあ、器屋さんとかこうクラフトとかにずっと並べてるんじゃなくてちょっともう一歩こう踏み込まないとって思います。
Like Ujiie-san, Karugane-san is also trying to find new possibilities for her work, and I really admired that. From here, I want to move beyond these two artists and then think about craft more broadly. Listening to the two of them, what I wanted us to think about together was this. Why are so many makers now looking for different ways to present their work and reach new markets? One part of the background is that, in Japan, some forms of traditional craft are no longer as widely used or in demand as they once were. When you look at it that way, makers stepping outside the usual frame to find new ways of getting their work to people seems completely natural to me. And one of those other paths is the world of art. But when you try to go there, you hit those differences in how the art world works that I touched on earlier, a different kind of wall. Still, I believe the possibilities for craft in the years ahead are far greater than those barriers. This is not the first time the value of craft has been questioned and reimagined. Over 100 years ago, when industrialization transformed the way things were made, the arts and crafts movement began in Britain. And in Japan, Soetsu Yanagi and others started the Minge, the folk craft movement. I won't go into the Minge movement in detail today, but it recognized beauty in everyday objects made by anonymous craftspeople. Movements that brings renewed attention to the value of craft have often emerged at moments when technology and the methods of production were changing dramatically. These days, advances in technology, including AI, allow so much to be made in a very short time. That is exactly why I feel that the knowledge accumulated in a place over time and the techniques passed down through generations may matter more than ever. Traditional craft carries that history within it, and then I think that accumulation of time and knowledge is a form of value that deserves to be recognized, even with the world of art. To me, that feels like one of the real questions of our time. I also spoke with Ito-san, who runs a gallery in Tajimi called the Space Ohara, and who introduced me to both of these artists. Tajimi has a school where you can study ceramics. In galleries in large cities, artists are often only taken on once they are fairly established. Ito-san, on the other hand, has followed their development since they were students, so his relationship with them begins at a much earlier stage.
もちろんそのね、言ったらビジネスパートナーではあるんだけど、まあそれ以前に人として知ってるっていう方が早いから。
I think having someone like that supporting you must be very reassuring for an artist. What he said about Tajimi as a place stayed with me too. Japan's ceramic regions often have their own distinct character, but Tajimi, by contrast, has developed by absorbing a wide range of techniques and forms of expression. Across Japan, many crafts regions have their own communities, with people who support the makers and environments where skills and knowledge can be shared. That, to me, is one of the real strengths of Japanese craft. But I don't think this is unique to Japan. Wherever you go, there is a craft that's grown out of local materials, local life, and the connections between people. Knowing that background changes how you see the work in front of you. That is also one of the important roles played by gallerists and others who help interpret and communicate the work. So, does craft have to become art in order to be valued? I do think moving into the art world is one path, and then I really support the artists who choose to go that way. But I don't think it's the only one. We've talked a lot about art already, so I want to talk a little about some of the other possibilities. Let me break it down into three groups: the makers, the people who help bring the work to others, and the buyers. Starting with makers, from what I have seen in Japan, craft that seems to be doing relatively well outside the art world tends to have a few things in common. Of course, especially in the craft world, A high level of skill is a starting point, but rather than trying to do everything themselves, they often bring in strong designers from outside and use traditional techniques to create things that fit into how people live today, such as lamps, cushions, and furniture. I also feel that in Japan, there are more and more efforts to connect craft with tourism, giving more people opportunities to discover and then learn about it. And there are also examples of collaboration with well-known brands, characters, and anime, which help the work reach people who may never have had much connection with the craft before. Some people may see that as too commercial, but if the bigger goal is to keep these traditional skills alive, I think these approaches are worth supporting. That said, when I talk to makers, I often hear that there's no one in the middle, no one connecting the makers with the designer or with the market, so there are clearly other things that still need to be worked out. Next, the people who help bring the work to others. I personally feel that there are fewer people now who can really explain what makes traditional craft valuable or interesting. When that voice gets weaker, the real value of the work, and even the way it can be enjoyed, don't come through clearly, and that means fewer people find their way to it. That's why I think it's becoming even more important for the people sharing the work, for example, to speak directly with makers, understand the background and the techniques, and then help people see what makes it interesting. And finally, the buyers. When we look at the differences in price between the art market and the craft market, it's easy to start using price as a measure of value, but just because something is priced lower doesn't mean the time, the skill, and the thought that went into it are actually proportional to the price. I think we also need to train our own eyes. Whether it's a work of art or a piece of craft, I think it matters that we are willing to pay a price that reflects the skill and the background behind it too. And learning why a particular craft developed in a particular place, what history lies behind it, and then how rare those skills are, that can be genuinely fascinating in itself. I don't have a clear answer myself yet, and then I know that I'm talking about ideals here, but by having these conversations, by letting people know what's interesting about craft and then how much time is layered up inside it, that might be one of the things I can actually do. And I really hope it spreads even a little at a time. And if I ever get to create a physical space, I would love it to be a place where people can experience what craft really means today. I'm hoping that within this community, it won't just be me, but that together we might find some interesting way forward about the future of craft. So please leave your thoughts and ideas in the comments, and I would love this to become a place where we can talk it through together. The details of all three people in today's video are in the description, so do check them out. They have some exhibitions coming up and they might be in your country, so don't forget to follow their Instagram too. I will keep meeting different makers and sharing what makes their works so interesting. So if you subscribe, it really helps me keep making these videos and sharing these stories with more people. And also, I write about the things I cannot fully explore in these videos over on Quiet Japan, so I would be very happy if you took a look there too. See you in the next video.